next speaker this morning is Healy. Marianne is the Engagement Manager for the Rangelands Cluster Project with Ninty One, who, just reminding you, are the sponsor of this session. Marianne has a long background in NRM. She spent over 12 years in state government in South Australia working on NRM policy and delivery, and prior to that worked with NGOs and local government, all while staying involved with the family farm on the Adelaide Plains. Today, Marianne is going to tell us about the Rangeland Cluster Project and its approach to developing improved climate change information for NRM planning. Marianne.
Thanks, Claire. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land. I'd also like to acknowledge my co-authors Kate Forrest and Gary Baston, who worked with me on this project. As Claire said, what I'm going to talk about today is our approach to working together across the rangelands. It's really, I guess, a bit of a case study of the way the NRM regions and researchers came together to work to improve planning for climate change adaptation in the rangelands. So in 2012, the Australian Government funded the NRM Planning for Climate Change Fund. This map shows the 8 regional clusters that were set up. They're clusters of NRM regions across the country, and they were generally based on climatic regions. As you can see, the largest region, not unusually, is the Rangelands, comprising of 7 NRM regions across 5 jurisdictions, and 2 of the regions sit in 2 clusters, so with its usual complexity. What the map also shows, there's some stars on there, that's where the spread of the people involved in the Rangelands cluster were based, with the green stars being the NRM planners. The natural resource management organisations have planners on staff. The yellow stars were where the national scientists were based. The red stars were where the researchers who were based on our project were working. So the main partners in the project were the NRM Alliance, the Rangeland NRM Alliance, through working with Kate. They represented the NRM groups, Ninty One as the project manager and facilitator, and a range of researchers, mostly based with CSIRO and also the University of Canberra. So how did we approach it? What was our approach? Got a sort of neat and tidy diagram trying to show the way that we worked, bringing the information and research on one side from CSIRO and the University of Canberra and other sources, together with the NRM groups through a process of facilitation and collaboration and working in partnership. But really what we were doing was building personal relationships and making sure we worked with the end users and end purpose in mind all the way. This diagram's pretty neat and tidy, but represents much more complex interaction of programs and people, taking existing information and taking existing data and turning it into information that was useful for planning. Again, another neat and tidy diagram with a few of the steps that we took. You won't be able to read all of these, but it was to try and show we did lots of different processes and steps along the way. And I guess what we think was pretty innovative and unconventional in a research space and probably in a planning space was that we all came together from the start of the project, and then we kept coming back together. We came together in face-to-face workshops and meetings where everybody was there, including the funders, so that they could hear the issues firsthand and hear how we were working together to solve them. That was also an opportunity for the relationships to build between researchers and NRM planners, but also for the NRM planners themselves to build a network of peers, because as many of you would know, when you work remotely, it's hard to find someone to work with and compare and do problem solving with and testing ideas. Other methods of getting together, we used telephone link-ups for the project coordination group. We met monthly to make sure the project was working. We had regional visits. Kate and I got to travel around the country and meet people where they were at and hear about their unique challenges and issues. We also set up an scientific advisory panel of other experts from a whole range of different fields that were able to bring in external ideas, connections to other research, and also advise our researchers. So again, looks like some neat and tidy steps. Probably should have looked a bit more like this. A lot of, well, what do you want? Well, what can you give us? Well, what do you want? Well, what can you give us? But as I said, those personal conversations, people being in the room together, was a big part of how we were able to work through that. And some of that looked a bit more like this. So there's not much dancing going on there. In fact, we might say some people look a bit bored, but at least they're bored together and they're working through what they can and can't achieve. As I said, we've got scientists presenting to NRM planners. We've got planners talking to each other. We've got the Australian government in the room hearing some of the issues. And, you know, at one point they were a bit challenged about the sort of approach we were taking, but being in the room and hearing both from the planners and the researchers really helped that relationship as well. And we could see that people were valuing that because over time more people were coming to the workshops and participating rather than less. So some of the advantages of this approach were that we were able to be flexible and adaptive with the end products, the research that we were producing. We were testing it along the way. These maps are just a couple of examples of, I guess, some of the flexibility. The first one on the far side shows the map that came out of the National Projections Project. Initially, when we met with the projections team, they were talking, well, the region's so big, maybe we'll just use the national average. Then they said, oh, well, no, we'll divide it down. All right, we'll divide it in half. We'll do a east-west split and use the Western Australian border. But as they sat in the room with the people involved in the project, the researchers and the NRM team, there was more discussion, there was some following emails, and eventually we settled on this sort of north-south split because that was a much more meaningful climatic line to consider. The second map shows some of the rainfall return information, return period information, and through discussion with the NRM staff, Gary Baston, who worked on this project, was able to come up with different intervals and then also develop a simple tool so that people could repeat the methodology themselves and use the intervals that suited them. So they were just two examples of some of the changes that happened over the course of the project. So what did we do? We eventually landed on a series of topics that were going to be useful for NRM planning for climate change adaptation, and we've produced a series of reports on these different topics. They're all available online. I'll give the website in a moment. What we've also done is then produce that in a hard copy report that will be available for the NRM staff and other people who want it. Later in the week I'll have a copy sitting at the Rangelands Alliance stand where Kate may be, which you can have a look through, and if people are interested. That paper also includes a really simple tool that we work through with some of the members of the Scientific Advisory Panel and the NRM planners to help them think about how they then get all that information into their plan. It's one thing having the information, but how do they get it into their plan? And what does it look like? Well, we've got all kinds of different formats and forms of information. It's information interpreted into what the planners said would be useful that could help them inform their planning. Some of it can be picked up and put into plans. It can be put into communication information to help them have the discussions with their community about climate change and how it will impact in the rangelands. Thanks. And all of this information is connected to the national projections work. So at the same time, the projections team was working away undertaking projections work at a cluster level. So our reports are available at the moment on the NINTI One website, all of those 11, I think it's 11 reports and a couple of tools. And at the moment, what we're doing is still working with the NRM groups to make sure that they're able to access that information, but also the information out of the other clusters. We're trying to look at what's coming out of the other parts of Australia to see if any of that we can value add and make it relevant for the rangelands, some of the methodology, some of the other tools. And we really think that by working together at every step, talking, listening, consulting experts, we've been able to produce some relevant and useful tools and information. Now, because some of you might have come to a climate change talk thinking you might get some climate change information, I did just want to put up a slide that this is from the Projections Project, and that website I recommend you all go and have a look at. They've put together all of the projections by region, by cluster region, so there's bigger clusters, but there's also a whole range of tools there that you can look at that give you things like an analogue tool where you can put in a town at a temperature rise and see what it might be like. So you can see that if you add a 2-degree temperature rise to Melbourne, it becomes like Dubbo. Anyway, it's fun to play with, a little daunting and scary, but it's also really great communication information to help you talk about it. And I also have a hard copy of the Rangelands report here that you can have a look through, and I can then provide you with a hard copy if people are interested in that. So I'd just like to acknowledge all of the partners in the project, the 7 NRM regions, and the Australian Government, CSIRO, University of Canberra and the NRM Alliance. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. Any questions for Marianne?
Thanks, Marianne. Living in Alice Springs this summer, we got to feel what a 2-degree temperature rise feels like because we just had it. And I was thinking about that from your perspective. With the political climate, it's been very much against talking about climate change, and great to see the work still going ahead. And what your comment might be on what that has been like.
I choose not to talk too much about that. It has been challenging. I suppose we were just getting started in a lot of ways when the position on climate change changed, and so that has been a challenge to be able to continue keeping motivation, keeping people engaged. I think because we were working with researchers and NRM planners who were all pretty committed to and recognise that that's happening, we were able to do that. The real challenge is for the NRM community to be able to work with their local community to talk about it. So what we were trying to do was give them the tools and information to help them be able to do that. I guess the most disappointing thing is what we've of course recognised is there's a whole lot of information gaps and research gaps where that goes at the moment. It's not, hopefully down the track we'll get to sort of reinstigate some of that. But yeah, it has probably added to the challenge in some ways.
We're leaving the questions at 1. Will you thank Marianne?